Hello, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us. Welcome to the online workshop to get some hands-on understanding of MCP servers and what it looks like to bring those into an enterprise setting. I'm Bill Maxwell. I'm joined with Connie Lynn. Um, we'll be going over our event today. And yeah. So we've got a 60-minute workshop here, give or take. It could be a little less, could be, well, we'll try and stop it to be mindful of everyone's time today. Yeah, we're going to be going all in on MCP and the model context protocol, and we'll be using a couple different things to try and show how it's used and what it's good for. This session is going to be recorded, and you should be able to catch it on YouTube shortly.
So we've got some upcoming events we want to share with you. Next week is the MCP Developer Summit in Europe, which Obot has been organizing over the past several months. It's next Thursday, October 2nd in London, and there's still time to register if you're still able to go. Just visit mcpdevsummit.ai and you can register there. We also wanted to share every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, we have a live stream that's focused on the latest MCP content. So, in about an hour, you can tune in to our MCP Dev Summit YouTube channel. We have a couple interesting use cases today, so go ahead and check that out.
Cool. So in our workshop today, we're going to do a quick scan just to kind of get an understanding of how much everyone knows about MCP, and then we'll dive into the one-on-one, and then we'll just start looking at some MCP servers, and then kind of go into the opportunities and challenges and an architecture that brings MCP into the enterprise in a safe way. And then we'll follow up with more demos, and yeah. So for now, let's take a couple, if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to answer a couple quick questions for us. We just want to see just kind of basic experience and understanding of MCP already. Great. And I think we could probably end that now. Thanks for everyone for taking a moment to answer that. Looks like we've got a good mix of people from different parts of the organizations and different roles within, and a lot to some familiarity, but we'll be diving in today with the MCP stuff. So thank you for that. Yeah, so let's dive into MCP 101. So what is the Model Context Protocol, or MCP? This is think of it like the USB port and the USB plug for connecting your LLM applications or your models from Anthropic or Google or um, OpenAI, and you want to be able to connect those with systems, which is where a lot of really powerful and interactions can occur, and automations, things that were once really difficult now become much, much easier. And so with the MCP, this standardized protocol makes it easier, more portable, and standardizes these interactions and these capabilities so that you don't have to build those components multiple times. And so the MCP is made up of multiple layers. You've got your MCP host. This is your LLM application. So think of Claude Desktop or Goose or Obama, for instance. Those are clients. And then if they support MCP, then you can connect those, and each one of those our connections are considered the client. And the thing that's responding to those is the is the servers, the MCP servers. And so those are just lightweight programs that implement the receiving end of the model context protocol. And those are what respond. Those can run either on a third party or they can run locally on your machine. But basically, they are connected over a standardized interface so that you're able to interact with those. And so this is really important because, you know, it would be, the protocol is open. We've seen, with the internet, like, HTTP being an open protocol and, just developed, making it just once it was open and anyone can embrace it, the ecosystem flourished and, we were able to get that. So with MCP, we get a similar, effect. And as the protocol is standardized, people are building standardized sets of tools. Those are plugging into clients because all of the major LLM clients are able to interact with this. So you just get this ecosystem, and it starts building up these composable servers that you can then start automating and working with in your AI. All of the tooling is getting better and easier to actually develop these servers. There's like multiple different languages that so whatever you're comfortable with or familiar with, you can develop new servers, new features, new functionality, and share those. And recently, as the ecosystem continues to grow, ChatGPT or OpenAI and ChatGPT just announced that they're able to connect, and that's a big one. I think I saw Olama today announce that they have a new web search MCP server that they just launched. So it's continuing to grow, and it's plugging into more and more of the tools that you're using, and it accelerates the adoption of AI and what your users can actually do with it. And so the protocol itself is standardizing a lot of the plumbing and the basics of how to actually plug in an LLM and um, and with these tools. So it's standardizing like what's the main way to authenticate and access these things. And the specs largely dictates using OAuth, which is something that's been around. But they continue to push it. There's standardized transports, so you can use something locally over standard IO or the streaming HTTP protocol. You can configure prompts. So one of the interesting things about, I have all these tools, how do I actually interact with them? So you can pre-can these components like prompts that basically, predict how to interact with this thing, like go find this thing, and the model should then respond. Tools are the really the main piece of functionality. And I think when you say MCP server, this is the piece most people are thinking about. And these are actually the capabilities to actually interact with other systems and APIs and databases and being able to um, pull that information. And so, those are the really powerful thing. But the other bit it could do is resources. And so this is where a lot of really interesting innovation is happening. A resource is just a read-only view of an object. So it could be a document, a PDF, a web page. And it's recently been extended, and the community has a project called MCP UI. So these resources can actually return HTML snippets that get rendered in the chat. And so it's kind of like a new interesting way for clients that support it, and the MCP UI spec or extensions there. You can actually render rich, UI experiences in your chat, which is really innovative, and the user experiences that you can generate become really innovative and unique. It also if you have a tool, it's got other lower level capabilities that aren't used as much, but are pretty important. I think elicitations is one that is very powerful. So with that is a tool call can elicit either a confirmation, like, do you really want to delete this database? As a safety stop. And so you get that human in the loop. It forces the user to interact with the workflow that's going on. So it's a very useful and powerful thing. Sampling is if you get a bunch of database records with a tool, and then you want to ask the model to summarize that. Sampling is how you would basically send that request back to the client. to actually run through the LLM. So the MCP spec is really, it focuses on giving a lot of control to the end user and the client and what they're going to be doing. Um, and so that is one of the nice things about that. So that is where sampling fits in. And so at a architecture level, there's a couple different. Before I jump into the architecture, were there any questions, Connie? I saw there was a couple flashes that popped up, but
Yeah, a couple. There's one, which SDKs or languages have the most mature support right now.
I think what you find, like the most mature systems are, most people are developing in either TypeScript, Node.js, or JavaScript, and Python. And I think that's sort of evidenced just by the community in the way that if you go and visit, the readmes of most MCP servers, it's either like a UVX or an NPX command to actually fire it off. So, another one that we like is pretty common to, just build and package those in Docker containers, regardless of language. And so it's somewhat agnostic. So it varies. There is language support for, I believe there's Rust, and I think I've seen some other fairly popular languages. You know, we we've done a lot with Go ourselves, but we typically are moving in a TypeScript direction ourselves. So it varies, but the spec is well defined, and the community has tools, and if you go to the Model Context Protocol .io main website, you can get a good lay of the land for what's available.
Thanks. I hope that answers your question. We do have, there's one more question, which I think you'll probably address a little bit later on your presentation, but how do you anticipate MCP managing things like context overload? Having a hard time plugging into agents. Sometimes even the best MCP servers can override core agent behavior. So kind of moderating that, controlling that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it depends on the use case and sort of, there's probably some stop gaps and safety things that could be done, with the like a gateway to make sure that you're not always overloading. But I think part of it is sort of on the agent framework and actually, doing a little bit of um, management on the context side there and managing the tools and the threads. So it gets more, I think, onto the client side in some cases than it does on the MCP side. But yep, I don't have a great answer, but I think I can try and touch on a couple points where, depending on where you want to do the defensive layers, like it's probably a layered approach. So there's two main ways to interact with an MCP server. One is over standard I/O, which is typically for things that are going to be running local on the machine, and you're going to interact with locally. Sometimes for development, this also is useful. Um, but really, in a lot of cases where you're seeing a lot of the services and SaaS companies and like the bigger players step in is around streamable HTTP. This leveraging HTTP under the hood. It's a fairly with the protocol, going back and forth. The and that one is becoming more and more popular, especially as third parties are producing them. Then originally there was SSE, but that has been deprecated, and in favor of streamable HTTP. It's sort of been so you can do streamable HTTP, and SSE is a feature of that protocol. But you might still run into a few MCP servers that haven't been updated to use the newer protocols, and so you might see that around. But if you're building a new one, pick one of these two, standard I/O or streamable. And so the authorization piece is the other big element here. And so it's one thing to have a server that can, read all your files and databases. It's another to do it securely. And so, the MCP spec is working, and a lot of work is being done in the space to address, authorization for tools. And so your main components, you've got your clients, your MCP servers, and then authorization servers. And so within that, what happens is the client communicates with the server. If it's not authenticated, it gets told so, and then the MCP client is supposed to go and register and then OAuth into that MCP server, and the user goes through standard web-based OAuth flows. Um, and then access tokens are shared and given back. Um, they're working this work typically right now. The initial stuff is largely focused on a human interacting with it through like a normal chat client and going through standard web-based OAuth flows. There's work being done on the agent side or system to system type of OAuth flows where a person doesn't need to be involved in that flow. And so I think, the next draft and forward, they'll be continuing to add enhancements to the spec to address those things. And so hopefully we'll see MCP agent and clients continuing to or come out that start taking advantage of those new spec pieces. So let's just quickly take a look at MCP servers and actions. Were there any questions that came in on that?
No,
Nope.
you can keep going. All good.
Cool. So yeah, I'm going to use a client called Goose. This is from Block. They um, it's open source. You can download it and run it. I could also use Claude Desktop, VS Code, Cursor. There's tons and tons of clients now that support MCP. Um, I like Goose. It's pretty cool. And so here in my settings, my MCP servers, Goose calls them extensions, but they're MCP servers. And so here I've got a DuckDuckGo MCP server, and sort of the anatomy of it in most tools is I give it a name, I pick the protocol that it's going to be interacting with, and then I give it the command. And so this goes back earlier, we were saying which languages. The two you see most prevalently are UVX and NPX. So that sort of leans into the Python for UVX and TypeScript, JavaScript for the NPX. You can set environment variables. That's how, at least locally, credentials or things of that nature get passed in through configuration, through environment variables. So configuration, and if you needed to do API keys, standard IO typically doesn't implement the OAuth spec there. So once that's enabled, I should be able to now come and start chatting. And so here I'll just say, search for the latest news on MCP model context protocol. And so I've activated Goose is activating the extensions, and so it is now asking to call a tool. So the nice thing about your clients is they can either automatically make these calls or they can ask for confirmation every time so that the model can't necessarily just go run rogue, making calls you don't expect. But that is up to the client and how that gets implemented. So here, we made a tool call. We were searching for DuckDuckGo, or it used the DuckDuckGo extension, which gives it the ability to search. And so it found this news on the model context protocol and is giving us just different bits of information and summarizing it, send it to the LLM, and it kind of goes through and works through generating a response for us. So behind the scenes, what happened though was because I defined the extension, when it's activated, it actually runs that npx command locally on the machine behind the scenes, and that pulls it down from GitHub or wherever, or NPM in this case, um, installs it locally in an instance for this, and then starts running it and connects. And so then there's a protocol, the communications are happening. When by the time I hit enter here with search for the latest model context protocol news, the request to the LLM, the model in the background, in this case, GPT-4, um, had a list of all of the tools that the DuckDuckGo MCP server provides. And so that is how tools are, largely how it interacts with different systems. And so this one is, just using the something local. And then here I've got, um, you can add custom extensions. So you should be able to do like streamable, and I should be able to say like linear. And then I think it's, yes, linear MTP, linear. See if that's the right. So what I did there, when I added the linear MCP server, which is a hosted solution that Linear provides, and so anyone can access it if they've got a Linear account. It's now driving me through the LWAF flow, and so here, um, basically, Goose went to connect and initialize. It got a 401, and so it's running me through this authorization bit. So I've authenticated now to Goose or to Linear. And so now if I come back to Goose, that should have worked. It looked like it was working. Um, we were so close. Had it worked, we would have been able to connect to Linear, and I would have been able to chat with my Linear projects and see what's going on in Linear and interact with my tickets and my project management system. Cool. So that's just kind of a quick overview using Goose on different ways to interact with MCP servers and how to connect there. So let's talk a bit about the opportunities of leveraging MCP. So here, it really gives the model superpower because it enables the LLM to get at information and systems that it doesn't have access to by itself. It sort of gives it a body if you think of the LLM like a brain. Um, and so it gives it the opposable thumbs. And so here, what that can do is when you plug these into the model and you're interacting with it, you can have it gather information and process large amounts of data and help you make decisions. You can automate workflows that were previously fairly difficult to do because those workflows are digesting large amounts of text from multiple different sources to create a spreadsheet that ultimately bubbles up as a report. But you can actually kind of automate that now, and using MCP servers and the model, and being able to just kind of write some basic workflow, it becomes much faster, and you get time back. And so in that regard, you can see some cost reduction in the sense that any particular workflow is now faster or easier, or you can do more of it. And then as you give these reusable, universal components, these MCP servers that can plug into multiple different systems, your workforce can start putting them together in ways that you wouldn't have initially thought. And so it just becomes efficiency gains, and because it's a new tool for people to leverage in some really interesting and powerful ways. And then the experiences that you can start getting into that, I think we're just barely seeing sort of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to being able to interact with like a chat experience, that's one thing, and typing is, it's not so great. Now they're adding audio and you can actually kind of talk to it. Once you get over, some of that initial kind of hesitation, it becomes fast and powerful, and it just becomes another collaborator. And I think being able to have, visualizations and graphs pulled up on demand, and, without having to navigate all of these complex web applications or multiple different sources. It's going to be really cool, um, and really powerful. But this is an early technology, and so it does bring some challenges as you think about bringing it into an enterprise setting. And so a lot of that is the security concerns. It's a new protocol and a new surface area that you're exposing. And, and being new, it has things that we don't know yet. And so it's had time to evolve. And there's been some public things that you've noticed, or you may have heard that, this didn't work, or someone got data that they didn't expect to. So, there is some thought that needs to go into securing and bringing these MCP servers in. How do you want your data, and what systems can be connected into, and who can connect these things into which systems, becomes a concern, and something to be worked through. And then just the overall sense that it's a new set of technologies, and so that comes with its own set of learnings, and bringing into the ecosystem, into an organization. And so when you look at some of these security risks, there's some new ones that we're not as you know weren't concerned so much previously. The ability to inject prompts through novel ways that a user wouldn't, it's not immediately obvious, and so the model does things that you wouldn't expect. There's how which data you can access, and escalating privileges, and whether that's combined with other vectors. And even though there wasn't any actual breach in roles, there's abilities to have the model do things potentially that you wouldn't want it to. um, and then there's just a new supply chain to continue to look through, although those tools from, we've been running applications, and a lot of those tools translate, um, in just different ways to approach and look at these. The data governance and compliance bit, I think initially everyone, when ChatGPT came out, like, no, you can't use it, don't put company data into it. That's evolved, but as we've gotten more familiar and understand with what's going on, but still, you'll probably want to build MCP servers yourself in your organization. And what does that look like? You'll use third-party MCP servers, and want to be able to integrate that with your systems. And so it's just who has access to those systems, what data are they accessing, and how, and what do you want actually, what visibility and controls can you put in place? The ecosystem is growing so fast, but it is still new and discovering, and it goes one way and realizes things don't make sense. So, there's tons and tons of these because the protocol and the language and the tools, the support for those things all came out quickly, and it became very easy, and it is very easy to build, things that are unique for your own use case. And so people put out tons and tons of open source MCP servers, um, that really were meant for that one use case for that one person. And a lot of them aren't great, but that continues to change as organizations and companies and third parties are starting to pick these things up and see them as priorities, and actually building, um, putting resources and effort behind them. So it's continuing to evolve, and the spec itself is also evolving as well. And we're in that early phase where each spec update is important and enables new capabilities. These things are, because they're new, you know, finding people that have leveraged it or used it or fully understand it, bringing these things in, it is new, and it's a new paradigm. You're very much an early adopter, and so there's probably going to be some hiccups along the way. But your ability to adapt, and is going to be really pretty important to the success of bringing MCP in. So, you know, bringing these in and looking at an architecture for what AI agents and MCP servers look like, you can have it sort of falls into this bucket is the way that you know we see things sort of evolving and going. And so you're going to have your clients, you've got chat, your standard interfaces, you've got your AI programming agents, the developers, and people are already probably using within your team, Cursor, the Visual Studio, Cloud Code, all of those capabilities, all of those agentic development tools. And you're going to probably want to build agents on your own. And so, figuring out what those look like, and then connecting them into the overall AI side of the house. And so you'll go through probably like an LLM gateway or an LLM proxy. That becomes important when you want to be able to start the trace of, this client, we got this, request from a client to kick something off and, see that start flowing through. But also guardrails around that, like this request, just isn't something we want to allow to go to the LLM in the first place, or this response isn't appropriate to come from the LLM and, go back to either an employee or an end user or a customer, so you have that control at the LLM level of being able to control and apply policy and who can access which models, cost management capabilities, all of those things sort of fit into that overall LLM piece there. And you want flexibility, and so you should be able to connect to multiple different models in the back end as well. The other bit is the MCP catalog. And so I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks, the MCP put out their official registry spec and their specification. And so there's ways to publish to their registry. It's largely a metadata spec versus like a package type of registry where you would actually push and store the actual artifacts. This is more of a metadata where you can go find these things, how they're installed, and a bunch of information about those MCP catalogs. But you basically want to have a way, so there's a new standardized way, and that should be making its way into clients, and third parties will kind of extend that to build better and better services. And so, but that's really important because it gives your end users and the organization sort of like a centralized service discovery piece. Which MCP servers in my organization should I use for connecting to this system, or which ones do I even have access to? Which ties in closely with the MCP gateway. And so this layer is primarily focused on sort of either the running and hosting of the MCP servers themselves or the proxying to remote MCP servers. But this gives you that centralized point to apply policy, filters, guardrails, authentication, an authentication layer onto which and authorization of which MCP servers, who can see what, auditing, the ability to capture and ultimately pair up with like something from an LLM gateway, so you can see, the LLM made this request and be able to trace it through, and then made this tool call, and this is the response it got. So you can kind of piece together what happened, or what an agent might have done, if you ever needed to go back and take a look. So before I get into the demo walkthrough side of things, were there any questions?
A couple. Obviously, security is a really big topic with how quickly MCPs are evolving.
Mhm.
So, if there happens to be a malicious one and, people don't see it when they first get it set up, what is the containment strategy? Like, how can teams audit their servers to better manage and avoid these types of risks?
Yeah, I mean, I think in an enterprise setting and when it comes to accessing those systems, um, your standard supply chain, how you would bring any piece of open source software into an organization, that those processes, those code scans, being able to write, test things out in a limited blast area, like the things we've been doing with applications for a long time, like that sort of is the minimum sort of table stakes. Now, as you layer in some of these, the LLM, the AI elements, with the descriptions and text actually impacting behavior of a model. There's new tools and filtering and scans that need to be that can be done to sort of start gaining confidence and trust within those systems. I can show some of the hooks in the walkthrough when we're getting through.
How would you handle compliance requirements for GDPR or, HIPAA, especially in the medical world of all that data, sensitive data being transferred through the servers? Um, is there a concern or?
Yeah, there's definitely a concern, but the solution would probably vary. But I think I can show one way that we're thinking about it and where that might be. Um, and I think it's a layered, again, a lot of these solutions are all sort of layered on top of, who has access to what, and access controls. And then there's probably some filtering and monitoring of responses and tool calls that are going back and forth. And then just the ability to retroactively see what's going on. So I think I can touch on a couple of these points, and maybe part of the demo will show, I have, I'll show a filter uh, with some PII and blocking those types of requests. So,
Yeah, let's dive into the demo. There is one more question, but we'll get to see this. The question is about whether the MCP catalog is on the Obot side, or in the enterprise setting. But let's go ahead and check it out.
yeah. So we're going to be walking through Obot. It is an MCP gateway solution. Um, there are others, but we will walk through this one. So this is the main MCP admin side of things for the gateway. And so when you're configuring this, the first thing an enterprise would do would be configure it to their auth provider. So in the MCP gateway, before they access any MCP server that's hosted or access is provided through this gateway, they have to authenticate through the configured OAuth provider. So you at least know who is authenticating on the front end to the gateway. Those users are then, once we learn those users, you can assign them roles. So whether you want them to be basic users, users that can add MCP servers, share MCP servers, and then full administrators. And then you can see the different users and who has access to what. The next thing you would do is add MCP servers. And so out of the box, we're hosting MCP. We provide a catalog of MCP servers. Those come from a Git repository. In an organization, you could build your own Git repository and not use any of the ones that come from us, or just some of them. You can curate it however you'd like. And if you've already got merge request or pull request workflows for adding things to other systems, this fits in really well. A user wants a new server, they open up a PR with the server spec and the configuration. A team evaluates that and either allows or denies it at that level. You can also add them ad hoc through the UI. The way that we view MCP servers on the platform here is these three sort of buckets. The single user server is, think of the server that is going to use an API key. It is not designed to be multi-tenant. And each user has to give it their own API key for security reasons. So on this Obot platform, we are actually running MCP servers for you in containers on the back end. So this single user MCP server would get deployed on a container and per user. So anyone that wants to connect to it would get that. So when they come in, it looks a lot, you give it the name and the description. It looks a lot like what we saw in Goose. So your NPX, UPX, or containerized. One thing, what we found is, or in the process of, is containerizing all the MCP servers we put in the catalog. The reason for that is basically we can realize all of the benefits we've been realizing with containerizing our applications, particularly like frozen dependencies. Once it's a known entity that we can then sort of move and ship through. Whereas an NPX or a UVX is installing at runtime every time. So if for some reason something changes in the upstream supply chain, from a bug getting into something malicious, there's a chance that you would get that by basically running the install. Otherwise, you have containers, which you can kind of go back and audit. Um, it is one layer of the stack that I think is an important one for security reasons. You can kind of freeze your dependencies, and it's pretty low hanging. But then it looks just like what you had in Goose. You can add, arguments. You can add different environment variables to configure. So the other bit, so that's single server. The multi-user server story think it addresses two use cases. One is um, we've got an API key for a weather service, and we want all the users to be able to get the weather in their clients. So they don't all need their own weather service API key. They can just share that amongst the group. The other is if it is a multi-tenant and it's going to support OAuth, then you can deploy it that way. You can deploy the server that way, and what will happen is users will log in to the Obot gateway, and then if the multi-user server that they're trying to use, it will also go through an OAuth flow to connect them to that as well. And then lastly, there's the remote server. So a company like Linear that's hosting an MCP server on the internet, you can connect to that through the proxy. And what that buys you is the ability to audit what's going in and out, and also access control at who can actually use the MCP server in the first place within an organization. So once you have once you have your catalog built out, you can then create different access control rules. So these are just different groups. And so here you can say marketing, and they're going to be this user or whatever group you want to be able to add, and then have the specific MCP servers that you want to be able to give them. So they're going to want Zapier, they're going to want let me see, Asana, HubSpot, and maybe Outlook or something. Yeah, I don't see one of the emails, but basically you pick these servers and then you specify who when they log in, what MCP servers they would see. And what that looks like is, as a end user, I can only see the MCP servers that I have access to. I'm an admin, so I see the full catalog, but this could be locked down and I only see what, for instance, I had put in the marketing one. When I want to connect to one that I haven't done before, I can click connect. If there's any information that is needed, the user's prompted for the specifics, and then it would get deployed for that user onto the cluster behind the scenes. So if you want to connect, once this one's configured and you want to connect to it, you can click connect and you get access to just quick copy paste snippets for a couple of the major clients, but most of them have the same general format, so you can just use the URL. But you'll see this URL is generated and it's pointing at the proxy. So all of the clients will use the remote MCP server through the proxy, even Claude, which will use the MCP remote plugin in order to be able to do so, but you can connect that. Or if you just want to try it out really quickly, you can click chat and you can use this chat client. You can say, look up MCP UI SDK on context. So here it'll go, and it should go and actually make the tool call, resolve the library ID. So MCP, and then get that information. Yeah. And so it will generate what this is. And so it reached out and was able to do that. So coming back to the admin dashboard and on the gateway, um, if you're going to use the chat client, you can configure the models that end users can select from. You can tailor the enterprise Obot or chat client that you would like. And then from an auditing perspective, you can see you can audit these other components, tasks, or lightweight automations within the client there. So you can just basically do something like check the news. It'll run through this series of steps. And then the runs are the audit if you need to go back and audit what those look like. Coming back to the MCP servers, while we were making requests, you can see we've been making requests through this. And so here you can get access to audit logs. You can see, okay, this was searched, this went through, and come back in for visibility to see what's going on with the system. You can get a high-level overview of the health of the system and see all of the different tool calls that are being made, the response times. You can get at any errors that are happening, and then see who the most active users are on the platform. Now, another really important piece of that security puzzle, and I've been sort of alluding to it in a couple of my answers there, is the ability to apply filters or policies or guardrails. And so what this is within this gateway, we've got a filter capability, which is essentially you can develop and deploy um, an application that'll receive a webhook from Obot Gateway. You can specify which tool calls, which MCP servers within the registry, and a shared secret. So this one is one that I've deployed. And so this is a demo filter. It's using the Microsoft Presidio project to scan for PII. So basically just a webhook, and I'm going to have it just look at tool calls specifically for this PII filtered MCP server, which I built, and is just like a lightweight MCP server capability, like a lightweight MCP server. So just sort of walking through what that looks like. If I come to the chat side, one feature that we've got is sort of this project concept. And so you can think of them like GPTs or custom GPTs. But basically, what you can do here is create a project, add some MCP servers, configure it, and then share it with other members. So if you built one for the company for HR, it's got access to the HR systems and it can answer questions about those. So let's do this quick PII unfiltered test. Yeah, can say list by customers. And so this one is unfiltered and just has access to like a lightweight you know, it's basically just a lookup table with some sensitive data, not real or anything, just kind of all made up, but still. And then it's got a couple tools to list customers in full details. So let's go back to this and say, get the full details of number two. So that's probably, it's going to look it up and it'll do the full customer lookup. And so here's all the details. You probably don't really want social security numbers or driver's licenses moving through your system or to the LLM and coming back. So what you can do is apply that filter that we've got. And so this is using the same MCP server. It's just a different instance of it deployed so that it does it. So if I can still say list my customers, I can see my same, and then I can say, okay, get the full details of number two. And so this should try and call the full customer lookup tool. And here you'll see that it's unable to because my webhook said, nope, this thing contains PII. we're not allowing that out of the system. So this is just one example of a hook that you can add and sort of start, one layer again of security that you can add to basically sort of block and prevent these types of things. Um, can you get the non? And so the MCP server continues to work as long as it's not returning, all of the customer data without the sensitive information. And you might decide that this isn't what you want either, but this example, yeah, this is just an example of how you can layer in a filter to sort of look at the content and inspect, and the benefit of a proxy of having that point, that central access point to sort of look at what's going through the system at any given time. So yeah, that is our MCP kind of gateway architecture demo. Yeah, if you have more questions about the specification, the website for Model Context Protocol is very, very informative and always evolving. Check out the MCP Dev Summits. That's where the founding team all go and meet. They had one in San Francisco earlier this year, and the next one is October 2nd in London. And more planned. So you should be able to, get as much information as you want on the MCP spec. And they also have the previous context on the YouTube, and I believe the talks end up there as well. So, huge treasure trove of information on MCP back there. So that's the end of the formal presentation. Were there additional questions?
Hey, Bill, I realized I was on mute.
Huh.
There are a couple of questions here, but there's one that was asking about whether ChatGPT will implement MCP servers, and I believe that's already available as of a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah, I think it's currently in their developer preview, but it's going to be coming out more broadly. But yeah, you can connect MCP servers to ChatGPT. Um, and so, yeah, it's just another avenue to consume MCP servers.
If anyone else
Great.
has any questions, you can always, reach us on socials here or, visit obot.ai and fill out the contact us form there.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time today.